Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to another episode of Ding and the Quiz is Done. Today is the 30th of March and it is the anniversary of American President Ronald Reagan being shot in the chest in 1981. He managed to walk himself to the hospital and after the operation he continued to serve as president for another 8 years. Interestingly enough, Ronald Reagan is another example of a president who was a celebrity. He was an actor before he went into politics, and he was also a Republican like the current president. Okay, so same as usual, the link to the Do Now quiz is in the description, so pause the video and do it now. Right, I realise the fact that this series is called Ding and the Quiz is Done. I haven't been ringing the bell, so we've made sure we've done that now. Right, today we finally get to the Battle of Hastings, and we're asking this question. Why did William win the Battle of Hastings? So spoilers, I'm afraid. We're going to do a really quick recap of the battlefield. We're then going to do our reading. We then have a blinder of a diagram to fill in today, and we're going to use that information to look at a comparison question. So, a reminder of the battlefield. At the top of our very steep slope and our ridge here, we've got Harold in the middle and his two brothers, and they lead the shield wall. All three of them are fighting on the front line, and the plan is that over time further troops will arrive, they'll reinforce that shield wall, and they will be able to replace the troops at the front. William, down here, is on horseback, and his troops are split into three separate groups. We've got troops from Normandy, troops from Brittany, and troops from Flanders. And they're a mix. We've got some infantry, we've got some cavalry, and we've got some archers. And you will remember from last time that although Harold is well equipped with infantry, he unusually doesn't have many archers in his army. So that's what the battlefield looks like before the battle. What you now need to do, she says, switching to the visualizer, there we go. What you now need to do is go through the reading. Now, this is a really good overview of the Battle of Hastings, and you'll notice throughout we've got some of these pictures here that are all in this particular style. These are all from a source called the Y10 tapestry, which isn't a tapestry, it's an embroidery, but that's a different story, which chronicles everything from Edward the Confessor's death up to the end of the Battle of Hastings. Now, historians think it also showed William the Conqueror being crowned. Unfortunately, the end of the tapestry was damaged, so we don't know. So, read the keywords, then do the reading, and then we'll have a look at the diagram. So, pause the video, do the reading. Okay, so now that we've gone through the reading, what you need to do is go to our lovely diagram. And when you do this, I recommend that you work backwards. So the ultimate reason why Harold Godwinson lost the Battle of Hastings is because the Anglo-Saxon shield wall collapsed. And it collapsed because of three main reasons. So we're going to do the first one together, and then you can work your way backwards from there. So the first reason why the Anglo-Saxon shield wall collapsed is because something to do with the king. Harold Godwinson died. Now, whether he was shot in the eye, or whether he was cut down, or whether he was shot in the eye and then cut down, we don't know. But we do know that he died, and he died on the battlefield. So that would be our first box. And there's Mr. Spooner. But he's not going to say hi. No, he's not. So our first box is that Harold Godwinson died. And what we can then do is work further back from that to try and figure out why Harold Godwinson died. Now, this diagram is sticking with the traditional story that Harold Godwinson was shot in the eye. And so we can move backwards and say, well, it's something to do with archers. And we need to be really specific here. It's not just going to be there were archers or Harold Godwinson was shot in the eye, because it also links to this box as well. And if we go back to our reading, because we are working backwards here, it's going to be later on in our reading, which is this section here. William again ordered there we go, his archers to fire, this time aiming over the shield wall. So this is in comparison to early in the battle. Let's see if we can find it. Where there was arrows, and in fact those arrows killed Harold Godwinson's two brothers, but failed to break the shield wall. So what we would then put in our diagram is that William ordered his archers to shoot over the shield wall. And now that we've got this one, you can start working through the rest of the diagram. So fill this diagram in now and pause your video. Okay, let's have a look at our answers then. So we're going to switch. We're not going to open up an Excel document. We're going to switch to my teacher copy, which I'm now going to put up on the screen. There we go. And reveal the boxes as we go. So we've already got these two. Bear with me, trying to do it without destroying the whole diagram. Go. Harold Godwinson died. He died because William changed the angle of his archer's arrows. One of the other effects of this change in angle is that holes start appearing in the shield wall, but we can see from these arrows that this is not the only reason why we start to see holes appearing in the shield wall. Our other two reasons are staged retreats organised by William after that first initial retreat, and the fact that William couldn't maintain discipline in the shield wall. He could not get his troops to obey him, and there are two reasons for this. First of all, Harold was in the shield wall. This has a massive advantage in terms of the morale of the troops directly around him, but it does mean that he's unable to survey the battlefield as a whole, and he's unable to change his orders significantly after he'd given them. And because, as we saw early in the text, his brothers were killed in that initial volley of arrows. So that's our first two reasons, and then we've got our third. Now we need to be quite careful with this one, because as I've spoken about in earlier lessons, you need to make sure that you don't put too much into this. So one of the other reasons why the shield wall collapsed, or the third reason why the shield wall collapsed, is because some of the Anglo-Saxon troops were tired. And I really do want to emphasise that word, some. If you haven't got it in there, make sure that you add it. Because remember that not all of Harold Godwinson's troops travel south after the Battle of Stamford Bridge. The housecarls do, and they are the elite soldiers that would be fighting in the shield wall. But actually most of the third, the ordinary troops, would have been collected from the surrounding area, or as Harold travelled south. So some of the Anglo-Saxon troops were tired, and some of them were tired because they'd been forced to march a long distance in a short time after the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Now our final box up here actually relates to the Norman army, but I wanted to make sure I included it as a factor, and it's the fact that the Norman army had the support of the Pope. Now this doesn't necessarily mean that the Anglo-Saxon troops would be more tired, but it means that the Norman troops would have more stamina, and that's why we've got that dotted arrow rather than a direct one. So that's the diagram, and what I'd now like you to do, let's switch back to the visualizer quickly. What I'd now like you to do is I'd like you to colour code it. So we're going to split it down into three main factors, which are leadership, both William's and Harold's, luck or chance, and religion. I have three highlighters ready to go. So ready to go that I can't take the caps off apparently. Right, so we've got our three main factors. Now I want you to go through that diagram and highlight the different boxes according to which factor they apply to. So if we have a look at leadership first of all, a good example of a factor which comes down to leadership is William ordering his archers to change direction. I wouldn't worry too much about highlighting these three down here because they are the overall principles, the overall reasons, and they will be because of a range of different factors often that are combined together. So get your highlighters or your colours or key or whatever it is, pause the video and highlight your diagram. Okay, let's go through. So first of all, leadership. So we've already got the example that we've looked at there, but we've also got William staging faked retreats. We've got Harold being unable to maintain discipline, because remember, this isn't just about good aspects of leadership, it's about negative aspects of leadership as well. And we have Harold and the shield wall. When it comes down to luck and chance, I would argue that that's Harold's brothers being killed. Now, it was a leadership decision on William's part to fire arrows, but it was sheer luck that that first volley of arrows happened to kill the two really key leaders other than Harold. We can also talk about Harold's army being forced to march south as being an event of luck. Arguably, this is a little bit of leadership as well, because this was a decision on the part of Harold Godwinson, but it's also chance that William landed directly after the Battle of Stamford Bridge, forcing Harold to march his troops south. And then finally, religion is just the Pope up here. So, looking at this diagram, we can say that actually leadership, whether that's strong leadership on William's part or weak leadership on Harold's part, is a major factor in this battle. Religion does play a part, but it's more about bolstering existing strengths or exacerbating existing weaknesses rather than being a factor on its own. Now, when I talk about the relationship between luck and leadership, what I tend to say is that in this situation, luck on its own would not have won this battle. The death of Harold Godwinson's brothers is a factor in terms of the collapse of the shield wall, but it's not the only factor. So, with that in mind, I would argue that the chance events within this battle were then taken advantage of, or not taken advantage of, by either William or Harold. Without leadership, or without good leadership or poor leadership, then either religion wouldn't have been taken advantage of, and luck wouldn't have been taken advantage of either. So what we're going to do now is have another look at an interpretation question, which you looked at in lesson 2 when we looked at claimants for the throne. And remember, when we look at an interpretation question, the purpose of the answer, or the main focus of the answer, is how far does this interpretation match with my own knowledge? We're not interested in who wrote it, we're not interested in when they wrote it or why they wrote it. We're only interested in what it says. So our first step is to read the interpretation. William has to be seen as the better commander because he won. He showed extraordinary persistence and bravery, risked both himself and his army to win his gamble at Hastings. However, in any battle, the effect of luck cannot be ignored. Had William died early in the fighting, as was rumoured, then his army probably would have broken up. He might then have been known as William the Reckless, and instead historians would have praised Harold as a daring and brilliant general. Now, I'm going to add an extra step in here, which I think we neglected in that second lesson, which is to look at the overall argument of this interpretation, because this is what resulted in some of your paragraphs lacking that depth, because you were just zeroing in on those individual phrases rather than looking at the overall argument of the paragraph. So there are a couple of phrases here which really spell out Thomas's overall argument. So, the better commander because he won. This idea of Harold being a daring and brilliant general had he won. and this idea of William being reckless. And I think this phrase is really important here. And this links into this idea that history is written by the victors. History is written by the people who win in any one conflict. And therefore, when they write the history of what happened, they are going to create a narrative which shows them as being obviously at an advantage. So what Thomas is basically saying here is that William the Conqueror has been portrayed as the better commander, not because he was, but because he won, and because history has therefore been written by the victor. In the eyes of Thomas, it seems, William didn't win because he was the better commander. William won because... Where are we? That's another phrase we need. William won because he got lucky. And actually, if William hadn't got lucky, then he just would have been seen as reckless. And actually, it would have been Harold who would have been seen as the better general, because again, history would have been written by the victor, which in that case would have been Harold. So, according to Thomas, William wasn't actually the better commander, he just got lucky. And therefore, history has presented him as the better commander because history is written by the victors. And that's a really, really important point. It's quite a subtle point within this paragraph, which is why you need to be really, really careful. Those students who are going to get fewer marks are going to be the ones that leap in and say, aha, better commander, right, I'm going to focus on that, I'm going to write a paragraph about that, and then ignore the overall argument. So what we now need to do is we need to take some quotations, there we go, from within this interpretation and compare it to our own knowledge. Do you agree that actually luck was the main factor in William's victory at the Battle of Hastings? Do you agree that actually Harold would have been known as a daring and brilliant general if he'd won? Do you agree that... Where are we? That William was actually very reckless? So, pause the video, annotate the interpretation, and then we'll go through together. Okay, so I'm just going to have a quick look and see whether there's any extra bits that I want to highlight. Maybe want to have a look at this idea of persistence. Okay, so that's the overall argument. Now we're going to start picking it apart. And I think we're going to start with this idea of persistence, not giving up. And I would argue that there's really, really strong evidence for this when we look at William's willingness to change his tactics over the course of the battle. He stages fake retreats, he changes the angle of his archers' arrows. Even though he suffered heavy losses at the beginning of the battle, he continued to fight. There is an argument that he also knew he had no option of retreat, as Harold's navy had blocked that off in the English Channel, but he was still very persistent. So, changing tactics. Archers, retreats. Okay. Next thing to look at is this idea: the effect of luck cannot be ignored. In Thomas's eyes, luck was the most important factor. So lucky events, we could argue, were the death of Harold Robinson's brothers, the fact that the troops were tired. I'm actually going to make a slight change here. Unfortunately, I dropped that highlighter on the floor. When I do this diagram in the years to come, I personally think that there should be another box up here which links in to these faked retreats, which is the Anglo-Saxons chasing Normans, or the Normans fleeing the Anglo-Saxon Shield War because they thought that William had died. That also allows us to talk about William's victory. sorry, not William's victory. It allows us to talk about William's willingness to risk himself. He takes his helmet off to prove that he's still alive, and it's a really good opportunity to show that William took advantage of lucky situations. So when he talks about the effect of luck, we can use these as examples. So fleeing Normans, Harold's brothers, and in fact, Thomas goes on to talk about William possibly dying early in the fighting. The only thing that I would be careful with this one is to not just say, well, yes, these are lucky events and these help William win the battle. In your explanation, you need to talk about the fact that these lucky events were not just helpful on their own, they were helpful because William then took advantage of them. So, for example, William used that lucky event of Normans fleeing because they thought he died to then stage faked retreats. Okay, so this idea of Harold as a daring and brilliant general, well, you could argue this both ways. On the one hand, you can talk about the Battle of Stamford Bridge. This is a very good example of Harold being a daring and brilliant general. He has a reputation for that. But on the other hand, you can then discuss this idea of really quite fatal blunders that Harold made in the lead up to this battle. First and foremost, he positions himself on a ridge in perfect position to use archers, but he fails to do so. He positions himself on the shield wall that provides an advantage to the troops around him in terms of morale, but it also means that he was unable to change his tactics. And this ability to be responsive and change your tactics over time is one of the main things that won the battle for William. So that could be argued from both sides. Now, remember that you only need 2 paragraphs in this answer in order to get full marks. So what you should be focusing on is the ones that you are the most confident talking about, giving that evidence and then explaining why that evidence proves your point right. So you wouldn't need to discuss all of these in your answer. I would pick one and explain it really, really well. It's also really important that you address the overall argument of the paragraph. So this idea that actually William wasn't an especially good general, he was just portrayed as a good general because he was victorious in the Battle of Hastings. It was actually luck that won the Battle of Hastings. So what you should be doing now is writing out your paragraphs. Time yourself for 10 minutes, 2 paragraphs. So pause the video and do that now. Okay, so final thing for today. First of all, I want to make a bit of a recommendation. Now, you will notice when you look at the reading that a lot of my readings come from this book, William I by Mark Morris. It's available on Amazon. It's about £5 and it's an incredible little book. It is the exact level of depth that we require, and that's why I get a lot of my readings from it. I also get a lot of my readings from another one of Morris's books called The Norman Conquest, which is quite a bit thicker. But these are excellent books, and I thoroughly recommend that if you can get yourself a copy, if you've got a Kindle, I think this one's actually only £2 at the moment, that you give it a watch. In terms of taking it a bit further, if you want to revise this section, then you want section 6 from your Knowledge Organiser and quiz booklet. I've included a link from the British Library that looks at common myths about the Battle of Hastings, and then we've got a video from the BBC that recaps the events of the actual battle. If you can get hold of it, I also really recommend that you watch a video or a BBC episode from a series called Battlefield Britain, which is with Dan Snow and his dad Jon Snow, which is an excellent overview of the events of the battle. Normally I would show it to you because I have a copy, but obviously I can't show it to you at the moment. So see if you can hunt that out, because it's a really excellent overview of the events before the battle and the battle itself. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.